Telepathic hypnosis, case file number 2. David's case file, pseudonym obviously, runs at the moment 61 pages and 23,500 words and contains a catalogue of communications with the family and recordings and transcriptions of conversations with the patient using telepathy. Now, David suffered early neglect from his birth mother, was taken into care at 3 months and then adopted at the age of 12 months by an educated, well-provisioned professional couple. He shared this adoptive family with an adopted sister who also had psychological problems. At the age of 17, as his behaviour became increasingly challenging and without adequate resolution from the NHS mental health care system, the family asked for help from non-traditional sources. Now, according to an adoptive parent, and I quote, "He's always been hyper-vigilant and shows the typical behaviours associated with reactive attachment disorder. For example, lack of organisational skills, primitive fight-flight reflexes, low self-esteem, lack of empathy for others, lying, manipulative behaviour, sensory issues, high states of arousal, short fuse, etc. These secondary features of reactive attachment disorder do need a long-term, skilled therapeutic input that just isn't available. Expelled from school, dropped out of college, trouble with the police, you get the picture." And that's a very, very brief summary from one of the parents. It's much more detailed and complex than that, but just an idea. Now, in addition to asking for help from a workshop that was convened with this family and 2 other families where they were looking for solutions to similar problems, a workshop brought together 3 participating teams of interventionists, and we were one of those teams. Now, this actually created problems for us because with attempts to assess the efficacy of the interventions, there was the problem of cross-contamination of interventions with other therapists. So, as a side issue, where the workshop has its true value is actually in comparing the observations and findings of each interventionist team using discourse analysis for differences and similarities in what they observed as the contributory factors of the challenging behaviour. But our initial investigation, that is my medium and myself, revealed the following: 2 negative spirit entities, partial grounding of his spirit with the planet, with the earth, so he was very disconnected with his surroundings. An interdimensional portal giving access to his head, and symbolic representation of a restrictive strap across his chest. An infection of interdimensional parasites. These are like spiritual bugs that, in much the same way that bacteria and pathogens can infect us in the physical with disease. Similarly, if you have a portal and exposure to other dimensions, then parasitic bacteria from other dimensions can come through and infect the spirit. So he had such an infection. There was the voice of an earthbound spirit of a boy who died at the age of 5 that was attached to him. And in this case, he had a total of 9 dissociated subpersonalities, the eldest one being a 17-year-old with an aggressive and dismissive attitude. And there's a similarity here with case number 1, where you've got the challenging behaviour of the teenager. And in cases like this, where you've got a fragile sense of self, fragile personality, and the dissociation of this challenging teenager actually creates an autonomous being below the conscious control of the subject. So you get presentation of the symptoms of a dual personality or multiple personality or dissociative identity disorder. So another case that needs attendance of the reintegration of these self-created, dissociated subpersonalities. Behavioural characteristics included self-loathing, which again is very common for youngsters who've been neglected and rejected by birth families, and anger and hatred, and a need for substance and self-medication. And what I find is characteristic of such cases is an inability, because of the neglect and abandonment, rejection by the principal caregiver, the mother at birth. Such cases do not have the ability, they've never learned how to trust anyone. And for me, this is the primary concern of such cases. How do you get this person to learn to trust anyone? Now, following the very, very first intervention, in this case, a report from the family says this. I took David back to his own accommodation yesterday, and he still seemed a bit calmer and more positive than before. After helping have a quick tidy of his studio flat, I dropped him off in town, as he had a session with his probation officer that he didn't want to be late for. We only just left enough time and found that since we drove that way 45 minutes earlier, a diversion had been put in place, making us late. Now, normally he would express his anxiety in such a situation, generally being aggressive. But on this occasion, he didn't say anything. He was able to reset the sat-nav without losing his call and seemed reasonably calm when we arrived. Over the weekend at home, he spent more time looking for occasions to connect with people rather than avoid company. So all in all, I would say that there is observable progress. And it will be interesting to see if he finds some new friends. The mature tenant in the same house where his studio flat is did say that he thought the current lads who spend time with him mainly used him to supply them with weed. I was mainly glad he had any friends at all, as last year he seemed very lonely and isolated, which is also not good for his mental health. Now, I've chosen, out of the catalogue of conversations I had with this patient, I've chosen 1 or 2 notes here. And after connecting with him through the mediumship of Andrew, connecting with the patient, I used the suggestion that I would give David something that would enable him to escape the chaos of his experience as an alternative to taking drugs. And he agreed to try it. I used a hypnotic technique to take him within his own inner peace, and that worked well. Next, I asked him to imagine looking into a mirror and tell me what he saw. He saw himself as miserable and angry. I pointed out that his reflection was returning to him what he was putting out to the world. And he acknowledged a simple truth of that. Then I suggested to him that the mirror was in reality the world, and the world reflects back to him what he puts out into it. The light went on in an aha moment, and he told me with enthusiasm I should be teaching this to everyone. I said I can only teach those who are willing to listen. He agreed, and he called me his friend. So I felt that trust had been established between us, where I was not trying to tell him what to do, I was just trying to get him to trust me as a friend. And that seemed to work. And I'm just going to refer to a comment from the family. As a family member, it's very difficult to say what, if anything, the effects of telepathic hypnosis are in a case like David's, where one is not seeing dramatic changes. He's certainly easier to be around and has more self-control than he had a year ago. But he still feels skin deep, and he hasn't, as far as we know, had any real negative triggers in the form of a new girlfriend in that time. Previously, when he tried to have relationships with young women, they triggered his anger and distrust. He still does get frustrated with people from time to time, easily, and his immediate reaction is to threaten to kill them or have them killed. And he is full of conspiracy theories, coming out with outrageously anti-Semitic hate speech at times. Now, I know that the effects of attachment disorder are the kind of reactions that he displays: lack of empathy, lack of self-control, needing to be always right, inability to accept personal responsibility, and so on, all masked through aggression. But what struck me about the conversations you had with him through Andy was that the voice sounded very much like David. And it was easy to believe that Andrew was actually tapping into his personality. If it is possible to get to the root of some of the underlying fear and anxiety and the layers of negative personality traits built up around that, it can only be a good thing for him and for society at large. Now, the only factors preventing the continuation of this therapeutic approach are time, money, resources, and being able to set aside the time and the resources to focus on the case. As with all of these cases, they do need accurate focus of attention and dedication, in much the same way that any mentor or coach or therapist would give a client face-to-face. But the point I'm making here is that even in such difficult cases, therapy can be delivered through the back door, if you like, beyond the conscious awareness, telepathically, using a medium. And that's really the point I'd like to make.